Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss any more shocking and captivating stories. Enjoy watching. Eric Davis had always considered himself a grounded man. At 34, he had a steady job as a corporate lawyer, a cozy house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and a wife, Karen, whom he thought the world of. They had been together since high school, their love a familiar, comforting routine. But as with most routines, they begin to feel like a trap, an invisible one slowly squeezing the life out of everything. It started subtly. Eric's colleagues at the law firm would often mention his wife with a certain tone, something between admiration and playful teasing. He brushed it off at first. After all, Karen was beautiful, charismatic, and outgoing. She had that magnetic charm that made people like her, even love her. But there was something off about the way they spoke. "Karen's always at the games, huh?" Ted, a senior associate, once remarked casually at lunch, nibbling on his sandwich. "She's such a cool chick. Hard to believe she's married to a guy like you, man." Eric chuckled, not thinking much of it. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ted grinned. "I dunno. You're like all buttoned up and professional, and Karen's, well, Karen's Karen. She's got that wild side." Eric faltered. Wild side. He never thought of his wife like that. But the doubts didn't start to form until the next weekend. It was a Saturday, and Eric was wrapping up some work in the living room when Karen texted him, "I'm going to catch the game with the guys, meet you later." The game. Eric frowned. She hadn't mentioned anything about watching the game that day. It wasn't unusual for Karen to hang out with some of the guys from Eric's weekend football team. She was close with most of them, always showing up at practices or gatherings, a fixture in their social circle. Eric didn't mind, of course, he trusted Karen. But for some reason, that text made something in him shift, like an itch he couldn't scratch. That afternoon, Eric ran some errands. He didn't think much of it until he made a stop at the local bar. He didn't expect to see Karen there, not at all. But as soon as he entered, there she was, laughing, leaning into another man, her hand casually resting on his shoulder. The man was none other than Danny, a forward on Eric's football team. They were practically sitting in each other's laps, and from the way Karen was laughing, too loudly, too flirtatiously, Eric's stomach sank. He stood frozen at the door for a moment, unsure of what to do. He watched them for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of the scene in front of him. Was this harmless fun, or was there something more to it? Karen glanced over and spotted him. Her face immediately softened, a smile appearing as she waved. "Hey babe, didn't know you were out. You should come join us." Eric's mind raced, but he played it cool, offering a half smile. "I'll pass, just ran into a couple of things." He didn't stay long after that. He didn't want to confront her, not yet. Not without knowing more. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and with every passing day it began to grow. That night, Eric stayed up late, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. Karen, laughing, her hand on Danny's shoulder. Too familiar, too comfortable. He couldn't shake the image. When he finally did fall asleep, his dreams were filled with questions, accusations, and a growing sense of betrayal. The next few days were tense. Eric tried to act normal, but something was off. Karen was distant, almost as if she knew he was watching her, though she never mentioned anything. He tried to bring up the incident with Danny, but Karen brushed it off like it was nothing. "You know how he is, he's just playful. You're overthinking this." Overthinking. Eric wasn't sure anymore. Then came the text from another teammate. This time it was Chris, a friend Eric had known for years. "Hey man, just a heads up, I saw Karen hanging out with Danny last night at the bar. Thought it was odd, but didn't think much of it. Just thought you should know." Eric stared at the message, his heart hammering in his chest. He'd been right. Something was wrong. And now, the walls he had built around his trust in Karen started to crumble. He had to know. He had to find out what was really going on. But how? The following Saturday, Eric decided to do something he never would have considered before. He followed Karen. It wasn't a proud moment for him, but he couldn't stop himself. As much as he hated to admit it, he needed answers. He watched her as she left their house, her car pulling out of the driveway. Eric waited a few minutes, then followed at a distance. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. It felt wrong, but at the same time, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The truth was out there, and he was determined to find it. Karen's car drove to the same bar she'd been at the week before. Eric parked a few blocks away, waiting. He couldn't see her inside, but he knew she had to be there. After what felt like an eternity, he finally walked inside, his heart thumping in his chest. He didn't see Karen at first, but there was Danny sitting at a booth in the back. And then he saw Karen, slipping into the booth beside him. Her hand immediately found its place on Danny's leg. Eric felt a rush of anger, betrayal, and confusion. But before he could approach them, something even more unsettling happened. A woman walked up to the booth and kissed Danny on the cheek. Karen didn't pull away. In fact, she smiled at the woman and gave her a friendly hug. Eric froze. The woman was Danny's wife. Eric stood there for a long moment, his mind spinning. What was going on? Was this a set-up, or was Karen really involved with Danny and possibly others? His world, which had once seemed so solid, was suddenly unrecognizable. The drive home that night felt endless for Eric. His mind raced with the images of Karen in that booth, her hand on Danny's leg, the kiss from Danny's wife. A kiss that shouldn't have made him feel so small. Eric had trusted her. He had trusted Karen with everything, and now everything seemed like a lie. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Karen and Danny laughing, flirting, a world of secrets that Eric had never known existed. The thought of it gnawed at him, dragging him deeper into a well of confusion and anger. How had it come to this? Had Karen been seeing Danny, and maybe others, behind his back for months, or even longer? The worst part was the realization that he didn't know his wife anymore. All the little things he'd overlooked, the comments from friends, the strange texts, the nights when Karen was too distracted, too distant, it all made sense now, but only in the worst possible way. The following days were a blur. Eric tried to focus on work, but his thoughts were elsewhere. At home, Karen was acting as if nothing had changed. She kissed him on the cheek when she left for work, asked him about his day, made small talk over dinner. It was maddening. How could she be so normal? How could she pretend that nothing was wrong when he knew the truth? The more she smiled at him, the more he felt like he was losing his mind. One night, when they were lying in bed, Eric finally spoke up. The words came out slow, deliberate, like he was testing them to see if they would hurt. "Karen, is there something you want to tell me? Something you've been keeping from me?" Karen didn't look up from her book. She had that same calm expression she always wore, but tonight it made Eric want to scream. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft, too soft. Eric turned to face her, his voice growing tighter with every word. "I mean, you've been acting different. You've been out with Danny a lot lately. And I saw you two together at the bar the other night, laughing, touching each other like you're more than just friends. And then Danny's wife shows up, and it's like it's all just a big joke." Karen closed the book with a snap, her eyes locking onto his. For a long moment, they stared at each other in silence. Eric held his breath, waiting for her to say something, anything, but the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, Karen let out a soft sigh. "Eric, you're overreacting." "Am I?" Eric's voice trembled with anger. "Overreacting? You've been lying to me, Karen." "I know what's going on." She sat up in bed, her eyes suddenly sharp, defensive. "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous." "No," Eric's voice was firmer now. "It's not ridiculous, it's real. You've been with Danny, haven't you? And probably others too." Karen's face paled. She didn't speak right away. Eric could see her weighing her options, trying to decide if she was going to keep lying or finally admit the truth. She shook her head. "I don't know what you think you saw, but—" "No," Eric cut her off, his heart racing. "I saw enough. I don't need your explanations. I need the truth." Karen stood up from the bed and walked over to the window, her back to him. For a moment, Eric thought she was going to run, to avoid the confrontation altogether. But then she turned around, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said softly, almost like a confession. "I've been seeing Danny. And others. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to hurt you." Eric stood frozen, the words sinking in like a weight in his chest. He had suspected, but hearing it from her mouth felt like being punched in the stomach. He felt sick, betrayed in a way he couldn't even describe. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with his life, had been hiding this from him for God knows how long. "You've been lying to me this whole time," he whispered, the anger now turning into something colder, something darker. "How could you do this to me?" Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her body stiff. "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, her voice trembling. "I thought I could keep it a secret, but you're right, I should have told you. I'm sorry." Eric shook his head, his voice thick with disbelief. "Sorry, that's all you have to say? You've been sleeping with my friends, with guys from my football team, and you're sorry?" "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said, her voice small now, like she was trying to make it better with words that couldn't fix anything. "It wasn't like it sounds. I just—" "Stop," Eric interrupted, his tone harsh. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just want you to leave. Now." Karen's eyes widened. "Eric, no. Please, we can fix this. We can talk about this." "No, Karen," Eric said, his voice cold. "There's nothing to fix. You've destroyed everything. And now it's over. The next few days were a blur of silence. Karen moved out of the house by the end of the week. Eric didn't care where she went or who she was with. He just wanted her gone. The pain was unbearable. But as the days passed, it began to morph into something else, something more like numbness. Eric had always been a logical person, a man who solved problems with clear solutions. But this was different. There was no solving this. There was no magic fix. What Karen had done to him, what she had taken from him, was something that couldn't be undone. But Eric wasn't the kind of man to sit back and wallow forever. He had been betrayed, but he wasn't going to let that define him. There was only one thing left to do. The silence between them was unbearable. Eric spent the next week in a fog, unable to focus on much of anything. The house felt empty, hollow, like a shell that had once contained a life he could no longer recognize. Karen's absence echoed through every room. Her things, her clothes, her books, her perfume, were gone. The house had been returned to its state before she had ever entered it, but it felt like nothing was the same. The pain was still raw, but it had become familiar. The mornings were the hardest. He would wake up, eyes open, heart racing, and for a split second, his mind would trick him into believing everything was fine. But then the memories would flood back, and the cold reality of what had happened would settle in like a stone on his chest. Eric had to do something. He couldn't keep drowning in this emptiness. The betrayal weighed on him, but so did the need for closure. He had to confront her, had to look her in the eye one last time. And so, 2 weeks after Karen had left, Eric found himself standing outside her new apartment. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he wasn't expecting to feel as empty as he did now. He had imagined this moment in his head 1,000 times. He had rehearsed every word, every accusation, every argument. But now it just felt pointless. Karen opened the door after a few moments, her face surprised but not altogether shocked to see him. She was still beautiful, still the woman he had married, but there was something different now, something that made his stomach churn. "Eric," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "I wasn't expecting you. I needed to see you," he said, his voice steady but filled with the quiet fury he had kept hidden for so long. "We need to talk." She nodded, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. She led him to the small living room where they sat across from each other, the space between them feeling like a chasm. "I don't even know where to begin," Eric said, his fists clenched in his lap. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. Hurt, anger, betrayal." Karen remained silent, her eyes downcast. She didn't speak at first, but her breathing was shallow, as though she was waiting for something, waiting for him to give her permission to explain. Eric couldn't stop himself. The words spilled out, each one sharper than the last. "I trusted you, Karen. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for what? Some sick thrill of sneaking around behind my back. Did it make you feel better knowing you were betraying me with Danny, and God knows who else?" Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to do this to you, Eric. It just happened. At first, I thought it was nothing. I told myself it was just a mistake, that I could stop any time. But I didn't. And then I couldn't stop." "Stop." Eric's voice grew louder, his chest tightening. "You think that's the problem? That you couldn't stop? It's not about that. It's about the fact that you didn't care. That you never thought about me or what this would do to us. All you cared about was getting what you wanted." Karen wiped her eyes, her face pale. "I was selfish. I know that. I didn't think it through. And now I regret it. I regret hurting you, Eric. I never wanted to hurt you." Eric stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. "You regret it? Well, that's just great, Karen. That doesn't undo the damage you've done. You don't get to just regret it and act like everything's okay. What you did to me, what you did to us, there's no fixing that, huh? Eric, please, I'm sorry. Please, just..." "Sorry," Eric cut her off, his voice rising. "Don't say that. Don't give me your sorry. You don't get to come back with a simple apology and think everything's okay. You broke me, Karen. And for what? Some affair? Some fucking game?" Karen stood up then, her voice shaking. "I didn't want it to be a game, I just..." Eric shouted, the anger rising up in him like a tidal wave. "You didn't want it to be a game? Well, guess what? It was. It was a game to you, and I was the last one to know. How does that make you feel, knowing that you've been playing me the whole damn time?" She looked away, her eyes closing as if the weight of his words was too much to bear. "I didn't mean for it to get this far, but it did," Eric replied, his voice cold now, every word laced with finality. "And I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that things can go back to normal. I trusted you, Karen, and you broke that trust in ways I never even thought possible." It's over. Her face crumpled, and for the first time in weeks she let herself cry, her sobs echoing through the room. But Eric didn't feel the need to comfort her. He had nothing left to give. He had already given her everything, and she had taken it without a second thought. "I want a divorce," Eric said, his voice steady but resolute, "and I don't want to see you again. Not after everything that's happened." Karen nodded, her tears falling freely now, but Eric couldn't bring himself to care. Not anymore. He turned and walked toward the door. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just done. Done with the lies, done with the betrayal, done with Karen. Eric didn't hear from her for weeks after that. The divorce proceedings were quick. He didn't need anything from her. He didn't want her money, her possessions, or even her apology. He just wanted out, and the sooner the better. His friends were supportive, though he didn't talk to them much about what had happened. They all knew, of course. About Karen's infidelities, people talked, and secrets were hard to keep in a small town. But none of them said much to him. No one knew what to say. It wasn't until one late evening, several months after the divorce was finalized, that Eric saw Karen again. She was at a cafe, sitting by herself, her hair a little longer, a little grayer. She looked up when Eric walked in, her eyes softening, but he didn't approach her. He couldn't. Instead, he gave her a nod from the door, and then he turned and walked away, the weight of their past finally lifting off his shoulders. It had been 6 months since the divorce. Eric could barely remember the man he had been before Karen's betrayal, but one thing was clear: he wasn't that person anymore. The world around him had felt like a tornado in those early days after Karen left. Everything had been in ruins: his trust, his future, his identity. But time, like it always does, had a way of stitching wounds back together. Slowly, painfully, but with a kind of inevitability. Eric had changed. He had to. The old him, the man who believed in loyalty, in honesty, in family, had been shattered. But in its place was something stronger. The man standing before the mirror now wasn't broken. He was rebuilt. Work had become his refuge. His law firm had been busier than ever, and Eric threw himself into his cases with a singular focus. He had made a reputation for himself as a fierce litigator, a man who didn't just win, he destroyed his opponents. Every case became a way to channel his anger and pain. He threw himself into every negotiation, every meeting, every courtroom battle. The adrenaline of it was like a drug, but it wasn't enough. It never was. The emptiness still lingered in the quieter moments, the evenings when he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the walls, his thoughts a blur. He had filled his life with work, distractions, meaningless nights out with colleagues or friends, but the truth was he hadn't healed. He hadn't let himself. The wounds were still there, buried deep, like scars he could never quite cover. It was during one of those late nights, as he stood in front of his living room window, staring out at the city lights below, that his phone buzzed. At first, he didn't check it. It was probably a work email or some spam message. But then the name on the screen caught his eye. It was Chris. Chris had been one of his best friends for years. They had played football together, gone through law school together, shared beers after work, and confided in each other about everything. Chris had known about Karen's affair. He had even tried to warn Eric in the beginning, but Eric had been too blinded by love, too convinced that his marriage was solid. Eric hesitated for a moment, then swiped to open the message. It was short, just a few words. "We need to talk. It's important." Something in the simplicity of it made his stomach churn. The last time Chris had said that, it was when he had told Eric about Karen's first affair with Danny. That conversation had been one of the hardest things Eric had ever experienced. He had to confront the truth, and it felt like the ground had crumbled beneath his feet. Eric took a deep breath, typing a quick reply: "When? Tomorrow night. I'll come by your place." The next evening, Chris arrived at Eric's apartment just as the sun was setting. Eric had spent the day trying to distract himself, workouts, a few drinks with colleagues, some mindless TV. But it hadn't worked. His mind was still racing. When Chris walked in, he looked different. There was a seriousness in his face that Eric hadn't seen before. He closed the door behind him and took a seat without a word, his eyes fixed on Eric. "What's going on, man?" Eric asked, his voice tense. "You're scaring me." Chris didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced around the room, then met Eric's eyes. "I'm not here to rehash the past. We've all been through that enough." Eric frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Then what's this about?" Chris hesitated, and for a moment, Eric wondered if he should just ask him to leave. But then Chris spoke, his voice low. "You're not really over her, Eric. You think you are, but you're not." Eric's stomach twisted. He stood up, pacing the room. "I am over her. I've moved on. I'm fine." "No, you're not!" Chris shot back, his voice sharp. "You've been burying it, but it's still there. You've been running from it. From the pain, from the truth of what happened. You can't just move on like it was nothing." You've been hiding behind work and your legal battles. But deep down you haven't dealt with it, you haven't faced it. Eric's pulse quickened, his chest tightening. Chris was right. He had been running. But running didn't make it go away. You don't get it, Eric said, his voice strained. She destroyed everything. She destroyed me. How do you expect me to just get over that? To move on like it didn't matter? It does matter, Chris said softly, standing up and walking toward him. But you can't let it define you. You're letting her keep control over you even now. She doesn't deserve that power, man. Not anymore. You're better than this. You have to forgive yourself first before you can move on. Otherwise, you'll keep carrying this weight for the rest of your life. Eric didn't know what to say. The words felt too heavy, too real. He had been so consumed with his anger toward Karen, so focused on punishing her, that he hadn't stopped to think about what he needed to do for himself. Chris put a hand on Eric's shoulder, his voice sincere. You deserve happiness. You deserve to move on, Eric. But you have to make that choice, and it starts with letting go. The next few weeks were a turning point for Eric. He started going to therapy. At first, it felt like a waste of time, like he was opening old wounds just to feel the pain again. But slowly, he began to understand what Chris had meant. The anger he held toward Karen wasn't going to heal him. It was only holding him back. He stopped focusing on her, on what she had done, on the years of trust she had shattered. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the man in the mirror, the man who had been broken but was starting to rebuild himself piece by piece. One evening, as he was leaving a session, he bumped into someone outside the building, a woman tall with short dark hair and an easy smile. She smiled up at him, and something about her warmth, her presence felt right. Hey, she said, her voice light. I don't mean to interrupt, but are you okay? You look like you've been through a lot. Eric smiled genuinely this time. I think I'm getting there. And in that moment he realized maybe it wasn't too late to find something new. Maybe he didn't have to carry the weight of the past forever. It was a year after his divorce that Eric started to feel the first real stirrings of hope. He didn't expect it to come all at once, but slowly he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by betrayal and pain. And though Karen's shadow would always remain a part of him, it didn't have to be his whole story. He had learned that, in the end, healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about taking control of his own life and finding peace on his own terms. The end.